In the last months, I've been asked many questions. How did you start taking pictures? Why? Do you prefer to call yourself a photographer or a photo reporter? Initially, I felt obliged to the humanity that I found along my travels to tell its stories through photography. Then I started to focus on matters of international politics, wars, conflicts, social injustice. For my university degree, I traveled to Azerbaijan to find out more about Nagorno-Karabakh, contended with Armenia. That was the first time I felt that need to report everything I saw with images. And there and then I realized that my interests were attracted by the people and the effects that these conflicts had on them. In August 2008, yet another war had burst out in Georgia. This awakened my interest for a territory that had such deep ethnical and territorial conflicts. I arrived in Georgia 3 months after the armed conflict, and I found myself between people that had fled from their villages and that had ended up in these so-called collective centers, made in abandoned hospitals, schools, hotels, or student dorms. Basically, cement blocks of Soviet trademark filled with families of refugees and a lot of children, most of which had been ripped from their own villages, others that had barely even seen their origin land, because most of IDPs are in collective centers since 1992, after the first war with Abkhazia. Therefore, many are born inside the centers. That was my first direct contact with war, and I did not come home with answers, but with even more questions. Above all, questions on my job, what must be told and what must not, how can do it right, ethical questions that any photographer has probably asked him or herself at a certain point of their career. In that time, these ethical issues become something strictly personal, because during my travels I had many a time encountered suffering and poorness, but this was the first time I felt the urge to document these conditions as a professional. Ethical matters, therefore, more questions. It's not simple to communicate other people's pain. In April 2009, I covered on behalf of a press agency the earthquake in Abruzzo, a catastrophe. How could I document such a dramatic event? How could I tell people what was going on and why? The mainstream media kept up with the amount of diseases. So, what to do? That's news on dead people need a picture of dead people near it? What was I asked to do? I got to L'Aquila on 7 April. In the night, all I saw was a lot of dust and the leftover of city. Survivors on one side and journalists on the other. On what side was I on? I wasn't involved in the tragedy. And I wasn't there to help the lifeguards. I was a witness. I then understood that journalism is a difficult job. Again, I asked myself, can I do it without being totally cynical? I want to believe I can, that it's possible to illustrate human beings and their suffering without damaging their dignity or invading their privacy. This belief was my first step towards being a mature photo reporter. In Abruzzo, I had to find the right distance from both sides, distance from people who had lost everything and whose pain I could only partially understand, and distance from those who were documenting this tragedy in an over-invasive manner. I then tried to tell what I saw around me in maintaining the necessary distance. Rubble, dust, survivors, tent camps, rescue teams. It could have been the set of a disaster movie. I returned from Abruzzo with other questions, but my consciousness of what I was looking for had started to grow.